The sun burned mercilessly over the open prairie, hanging low and white in the sky like an unblinking eye. Heat shimmered across the cracked earth, bending the horizon until land and sky seemed to bleed into one another. The wind moved dry and slow, carrying the sharp scent of horse sweat, leather, and old gun oil. Somewhere high above, a hawk circled lazily, its cry cutting through the stillness like a warning. Along a crooked fence line, a woman hung tied to rough wooden posts. Her wrists were swollen and raw, skin split where rope had bitten too deep. Her lips were cracked and bleeding, her eyes half open and unfocused beneath the glare of the sun. What remained of her dress clung to her in torn, dusty strips, stiff with sweat and dirt. She had been left there for a full day, no water, no food, no mercy. Flies gathered where dried blood darkened the ropes. Every breath she took came shallow and painful, like a plea her lungs could barely manage. Her name was Eliza Monroe. She had stopped screaming hours ago. Not because the pain had faded, but because hope had. No one had come. No riders. No voices. Just wind and heat and the endless sky. Now she whispered to the emptiness, her voice brittle as dry grass, words tumbling out broken and desperate, nonsense to anyone who didn't hear the meaning beneath them. She wasn't begging for shame. She was begging for release. For someone, anyone, to cut the ropes and end the suffering. The wind carried her voice across the empty hills, over gullies and scrub, until it reached a narrow trail where a lone wagon creaked forward under the weight of dust and years. A tall man sat at the reins, shoulders stiff beneath a faded coat, his hat pulled low to shield his eyes. His face was burned dark by years under the sun, lines carved deep by hardship and loss. His name was Jackson Hale. He was 48 years old, and he had already buried more than most men ever should. He had lost his land. His cattle. His family name. His brother. This cabin ahead, isolated and weather-beaten, was meant to be his fresh start. Bought sight unseen from a seller in town desperate for quick money. Jackson remembered the man's uneasy tone over whiskey. "Careful, Hale," the seller had said. "Some folks around here don't take kindly to strangers buying land that isn't meant to be sold." Jackson had laughed then, brushing it off as small talk and superstition. But now, as the valley opened before him, that look in the man's eyes came back sharp and cold. When Jackson reached the cabin, the air around it shimmered with heat. Smoke curled faintly from the chimney, and for a moment he thought someone was trespassing. His hand drifted toward the knife at his belt. Then he heard it. A sound so weak it barely existed. A human sound. Jackson jumped down from the wagon, boots striking hard earth. He followed the noise toward the fence line. At first, he thought it was a trick of light, just a shadow thrown wrong by the sun. Then he saw her. Eliza was barely breathing. Jackson's throat tightened. He moved fast, pulling his knife free as he closed the distance. Her eyes fluttered open just enough to register his shape. She whispered again, ragged, confused words shaped by pain and fear. Jackson froze, unsure, until he saw the ropes cutting deep into her wrists. He didn't hesitate again. The blade flashed once. The rope snapped. Eliza collapsed forward, weightless as smoke. Jackson caught her as she fell, her body trembling against his chest. Her hands moved instinctively to her stomach, fingers curling protectively. He noticed the motion, though he didn't yet understand it. Her lips moved. A whisper, barely there. "My baby has to live." Jackson went still, the knife shaking in his hand. A voice echoed in his memory, his brother Samuel, years ago, laughing beside a campfire. "Out here, you don't walk past someone in trouble, brother." Maybe that was why he didn't leave her. Maybe that was why fate had brought him to this broken stretch of land. Inside the cabin, Jackson laid Eliza gently on the floor. He poured a few drops of water onto her lips, just enough to wet them. He soaked a rag and placed it across her burning forehead. Her skin was hot, her breath shallow, her body fighting to hold on. Every time she stirred, she whispered something soft and fearful. Jackson sat beside her, listening to flies buzz outside the walls. When her eyes finally opened fully, she looked at him with confusion and dread. "Thank you," she murmured. "But, they'll come back." "Who?" Jackson asked quietly. "They always do." A chill crept up his spine. Morning came hot and fast. The cabin smelled of dust and weak coffee. Jackson sat at the table, hat in his hands, worry carved deep into his face. He had cleaned her wounds, wrapped her wrists with torn cloth from his own shirt. Eliza stirred and tried to sit up. "Where am I?" she asked. "Why did you help me?" "You were tied up at my fence," Jackson said. "I couldn't ride past." She drank the water he handed her like it was salvation. "You shouldn't have bought land here," she said after a moment. "This place eats people alive." Jackson gave a faint shrug. "I needed somewhere the past couldn't find me." Her smile was small and bitter. "Seems it finds us anyway." Then her face changed. "They'll be back soon." Jackson turned toward the window. A dust cloud rose along the trail. "Riders." He reached for his rifle, loading shells with calm precision. Outside, horses snorted, restless. Eliza's breath quickened. "They found me." 3 men rode straight for the cabin. The one in front sat tall and sure, dressed in dark clothes that spoke of authority earned through fear. "Eliza," she whispered. "His name is Malcolm Vane." The name struck Jackson like a blow. He had heard it before, in town, in whispers. A land baron. A man who made people disappear. Boots hit dirt. A heavy knock rattled the door. "Come out, Hale," a voice called. "We know you're in there." Jackson stiffened. He hadn't told them his name. The door burst open. Dust swirled as 3 men stepped inside. Malcolm Vane filled the doorway, eyes sharp, hand resting easy near his gun. "Well now," Malcolm said slowly. "There's my runaway wife." Eliza froze. "This is private property," Jackson said evenly. Malcolm smiled without warmth. "Everything I touch is mine." The old anger rose in Jackson, hot and familiar. "She says she's not your wife." "The law says otherwise." Malcolm stepped closer. "You remind me of someone," he said softly. "A rancher who thought honor mattered." Jackson felt the ground tilt. "Samuel Hale," Malcolm continued. "Should have sold when he had the chance." Silence fell heavy. "Jackson's brother. Dead on a trail 6 months ago." Malcolm tossed aside his coat. "One draw," he said. "Winner takes all." Outside, under the burning sun, the world held its breath. The count began. 3. The guns flashed. When the dust cleared, Malcolm Vane lay bleeding in the dirt. It wasn't over yet. One of Malcolm's men reached for his gun. A rifle cracked. Eliza stood in the doorway, steady, fearless. Malcolm smiled one last time. "You don't know who owns this valley." Then he was gone. The law came at sunset. Sheriff Morrison listened. He saw the bruises. The papers. The watch. Justice finally found its shape. Days later, the truth came out. Malcolm's crimes. His stolen land. His murders. Eliza was cleared. Jackson rebuilt the cabin. One morning, she smiled at him and said, "The baby kicked." "If it's a boy?" he asked. "Samuel." Jackson looked out at the horizon, the sky glowing gold. Sometimes life takes everything. Only to give something better back. And sometimes, courage isn't about fighting. It's about standing your ground when no one else will.